the mantra. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a religious doctrine inside the McDonnell Douglas design team and the United States Air Force in the late 1960s. After the muddled performance of multi-role aircraft like the F-4 Phantom in Vietnam, where agile Soviet MiGs exploited American heavy fighters, the Pentagon demanded a purebred racehorse. They wanted an air superiority machine designed for one purpose: to kill other airplanes. The result was the F-15 Eagle, fast, agile, and undefeated in aerial combat with a score of 104-0. It is the gold standard of air supremacy. But if you look at the U.S. Air Force inventory today, in late 2025, you find something paradoxical. The latest version of this legendary dogfighter, the F-15EX Eagle II, is being marketed and purchased not primarily as a dogfighter, but as a bomb truck, a missile-hauling beast capable of carrying nearly 30,000 pounds of ordnance. How did we get here? How did the aircraft designed explicitly to ignore the ground war become the premier deep strike interdiction platform of the last 40 years? To understand the transformation, we have to understand the baseline. In the late 1960s, the U.S. Air Force was in a crisis. The fighter experimental program was launched to counter the Soviet MiG-25 Foxbat, which intelligence suggested incorrectly, as it turned out, was a hyper-agile superfighter. The Air Force selected McDonnell Douglas to build a machine with a high thrust-to-weight ratio and low wing loading. They didn't care about bombs. They didn't care about close air support. They wanted a plane that could climb vertically and turn inside anything the Soviets could put in the air. This design philosophy accidentally laid the groundwork for the bomber of the future. Why? Because the attributes that make a great air superiority fighter, massive engines and huge wings, are the exact same attributes you need to haul heavy loads. The F-15A had a massive wing area of 608 square feet. This was designed to provide lift for tight turns at high altitude, but lift is lift. If that wing can sustain a 30,000-pound fighter pulling 9G, it can essentially carry a massive amount of static weight when flying straight and level. Furthermore, the fuselage was wide. The engines were spaced far apart to improve survivability and airflow. This wide body created a massive underbelly area, what engineers call real estate, that was essentially unused in the air superiority role. By the early 1980s, the F-15C was dominating the skies. But on the ground, a gap was forming in the USAF's strike capabilities. The F-111 Aardvark, the primary low-level interdictor, was aging. The F-4 Phantom was retiring. The Air Force needed a replacement that could fly deep into Eastern Europe at night in bad weather and destroy Soviet tank columns. They launched the Enhanced Tactical Fighter competition. And this is where history almost took a very different turn. The competition to become America's next strike aircraft came down to two contenders. In one corner, the modification of the heavy fighter, the McDonnell Douglas F-15E. In the other corner, a radical redesign of the lightweight fighter, the General Dynamics F-16XL. If you are an aviation enthusiast, you likely know the F-16XL. It featured a cranked aero delta wing. It was sleek, futuristic, and aerodynamic. In many ways, the F-16XL was a more efficient flyer. It had less drag and incredible range. So why did the F-15 win? Why transform a dogfighter instead of using the futuristic delta wing F-16? The decision came down to survivability and redundancy, factors that are paramount in a deep strike mission profile. The F-15E had two engines. In the Cold War doctrine of penetrating thick Soviet air defenses, eating a missile or flak was a high probability. If an F-16 loses its single engine, the pilot ejects behind enemy lines. If an F-15E loses an engine, it has a decent chance of limping home. But the biggest factor was the crew. The F-16XL was a single-seat aircraft. In the 1980s, automation wasn't what it is today. The Air Force determined that flying at 500 knots, 200 feet off the ground, at night, while manipulating radar to find targets and managing electronic warfare systems, was too much for one brain to handle. They needed a WSO, a weapons systems officer. The F-15's large canopy and existing two-seat trainer variants made converting it into a two-seat strike aircraft much cheaper and faster than stretching the F-16. McDonnell Douglas took the air superiority frame and reinforced it. The F-15E is not just an F-15C with bombs. 60% of the airframe structure was redesigned. They strengthened the landing gear to handle takeoffs at 81,000 pounds, double the weight of a standard World War II bomber. But the real stroke of genius was the conformal fuel tanks. Remember that unused real estate on the wide fuselage I mentioned? The engineers bolted fuel tanks directly onto the side of the intakes. These CFTs hold 750 gallons of jet fuel each, yet they create minimal drag compared to traditional drop tanks hanging off the wings. Better yet, the CFTs themselves were fitted with weapon hardpoints. This allowed the Strike Eagle to carry its full fuel load and a full bomb load simultaneously, while leaving the wing pylons free for air-to-air missiles. The F-15 had evolved. It kept the APG-70 radar and the AIM-120 missiles, meaning it could fight its way to the target, drop precision-guided munitions, and fight its way out. The concept of self-escort was born. The hardware was impressive, but the transformation into a bomb truck was finalized by software and sensors. The F-15E was the first aircraft designed around the lantern system, low-altitude navigation, and targeting infrared for night. This pod system allowed the pilot to fly hands-off at 200 feet in pitch-black darkness using terrain-following radar, while the WSO in the back used a laser designator to guide GBU-10 and GBU-12 onto targets. When Operation Desert Storm kicked off in 1991, the Strike Eagle proved the concept. While the F-15C patrolled the high altitude, clearing the skies of Iraqi MiGs, the F-15E were down in the mud. They hunted Scud missile launchers. They conducted tank plinking, destroying Iraqi armor one by one with laser-guided bombs. This highlighted a crucial capability of the F-15 airframe: power generation and cooling. Radars, jamming pods, and targeting sensors require massive amounts of electricity and generate massive amounts of heat. The F-15 is physically huge. It has room for large generators and massive environmental control systems to cool the electronics. Smaller fighters like the F-16 often struggle with the SWaP-C limitation: size, weight, power, and cooling. The F-15, because it was originally over-engineered as a high-performance interceptor, had ample margins to accept new, power-hungry ground attack avionics without compromising its flight performance. By the 2000s, during the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the transformation was complete. The F-15E became the close air support platform of choice for many special operations units. It had the loiter time, thanks to those massive fuel tanks, the payload, dozens of JDAMs or small-diameter bombs, and the sensors to find bad guys in complex terrain. This brings us to the present day. For years, the assumption was that the F-15 would be replaced by the stealthy F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning II. The age of the non-stealthy fourth-generation fighter was supposed to be over, yet here we are. The U.S. Air Force is currently accepting deliveries of the F-15EX Eagle II. Why go back to a 1970s design in the 2020s? The answer lies in the limitations of stealth. Stealth aircraft like the F-35 and F-22 must carry their weapons internally to remain invisible to radar. This physical limitation caps their payload. An F-35 in stealth mode generally carries 4 internal weapons. An F-22 carries 8. That is fine for day one of a war, kicking down the door and destroying high-threat surface-to-air missile sites. But once the door is kicked down, you need capacity. You need volume. The F-15EX is the ultimate realization of the bomb truck concept. It utilizes a digital fly-by-wire system that unlocks 2 outer wing stations that were previously dormant on older models. This raises its carriage capacity to a staggering 29,500 pounds. It can carry 12 air-to-air missiles or a massive load of JDAMs or, and this is critical, hypersonic weapons. Hypersonic cruise missiles are physically large. They often don't fit inside the weapons bays of an F-22 or F-35. But the F-15, with its massive ground clearance and heavy payload rating, can carry them on the centerline station. The F-15 has transitioned from being the tip of the spear to being the arsenal plane behind the spear. The doctrine now envisions F-35 flying forward, using their stealth and sensors to detect targets, and then data linking those coordinates back to the F-15EX, which launches the weapon from a safe distance. The not-a-pound for air-to-ground fighter has become a platform that exists largely because of its ability to carry air-to-ground ordnance that no other fighter can handle. So, why did the F-15 transform? It wasn't because the designers failed in their original mission. It's because they succeeded too well. They built an airframe with such excess power, such robust structure, and such adaptable geometry that it outlived the very doctrine that spawned it. When the Air Force needed a dogfighter, the F-15A provided thrust and lift. When the Air Force needed a deep striker, that same lift allowed for heavy bomb loads, and that thrust allowed it to fly fast with draggy fuel tanks. When the Air Force needed a missile truck for the 21st century, the sheer physical size of the Eagle provided the cooling and power for advanced electronic warfare suites like EPAL-SS. The evolution of the F-15 teaches us a vital lesson in military procurement. Platform kinematics matter. You can upgrade software, you can bolt on new pods, but you cannot download more wing area. You cannot software patch a higher maximum takeoff weight. The F-15 survived for 50 years, not because it was specialized, but because its raw physical dominance allowed it to be generalized. It is the muscle car that was turned into a pickup truck without losing its ability to drag race. The F-15 started life refusing to carry a single bomb. Today, it is the most heavily armed tactical bomber on the planet. It turns out, if you build the world's greatest air superiority fighter, you inevitably build the world's greatest bomb truck. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and let me know in the comments. In a conflict in 2030, would you rather have more F-35 or a mix of F-35 and F-15EX?